At my son's funeral, just as the casket was sealed, my phone buzzed in my hand. The message on the screen made my knees nearly give out. "Mom, I'm still alive. Don't trust my wife. My name is Linda Parker. I'm 66 years old, a retired high school teacher who spent more than 4 decades in classrooms filled with restless teenagers and Shakespeare plays. I've been a widow for over 20 years, living quietly in a small house filled with memories and the hope that family would always be my anchor. For all those years, I believe my son Ethan was my safe place in the world, the one person who could never break my heart." 3 years ago, Ethan married Monica. From the very beginning, she was difficult to embrace. Monica had a way of tightening her grip on every part of Ethan's life, keeping him close to her, while subtly pushing away everyone else who loved him. She liked to make decisions for both of them often without consulting Ethan, and she had a knack for reminding me ever so politely that I was no longer the center of my son's world. Still, I swallowed my doubts. I wanted Ethan to be happy, and I told myself, love sometimes looks different than what we expect. 2 weeks before the funeral, Ethan called me with a burst of excitement I hadn't heard in years. He told me he and Monica were investing in a real estate project, something big that might even require them to move to Florida for a while. I remember cautioning him, warning that quick money schemes often hide dangerous traps. He brushed it off with a laugh, assuring me Monica had run the numbers and everything was safe. His laugh sounded forced, but I let it go. I trusted him. I wanted to trust her. And then came the phone call that shattered me. Monica, sobbing into the receiver, told me Ethan had died in a terrible car crash. The car had caught fire, she said, leaving his body so badly burned that an open casket wasn't possible. She insisted on handling all the arrangements herself. Through her tears, she begged me not to see him, claiming she was protecting me from a horror I couldn't bear. Against every instinct in my body, I agreed. But standing there at the funeral, surrounded by mourners grieving a closed casket, I stared at my phone in disbelief. If Ethan was truly alive, then everything I thought I knew about Monica and about my family was about to collapse. I slipped out of the funeral home like a woman escaping a nightmare, clutching my purse as if it were a lifeline. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The text message had told me where to go, the old Miller farm 15 miles outside of town. Once a teenage hangout for Ethan, now abandoned and swallowed by weeds, it was the last place anyone would look for a secret meeting. When I pulled up the gravel road, my hands were trembling on the steering wheel. A figure stepped from behind the barn, and even before I saw his face, I recognized the way he carried his shoulders. It was Ethan, my boy, alive. I stumbled out of the car and he ran toward me, pulling me into his arms. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The smell of him, the warmth of him, the reality of his heartbeat against mine, it all broke through the fog of grief. I sobbed into his chest like I hadn't done since he was a child. "Mom, I'm so sorry." He whispered, his voice rough. I had to do it this way. It was the only chance we had. The only chance Ethan what is going on. Monica buried an empty casket today. His face was older, somehow shadowed by fear. That's exactly the point. Monica isn't who you think she is. She's been planning this from the very beginning. He explained in pieces, the story tumbling out like shards of glass. Years ago, when my father passed away, he left me a stretch of land in Colorado, 40 acres of rocky mountainside that I had never done anything with. I paid the taxes out of habit, never once imagining it was worth anything. But Monica had quietly ordered a survey, and what she discovered changed everything. Beneath that land sat a natural gas reserve valued in the millions. She forged papers. Mom, Ethan said, his hands twisting in frustration. She tricked you into signing documents that looked like routine estate planning, but they actually transferred the property to me. Then she made me sign new forms giving her control if anything happened to me. If I died, she'd own it all. My stomach turned cold. I remembered the day she'd shown up with a stack of papers, smiling sweetly, assuring me everything was for Ethan's security. I hadn't read every line. I'd trusted her, but that wasn't all. Ethan's voice cracked as he admitted the rest. Monica had introduced him to a group offering high-return investments. At first, it seemed real money came in quickly enough to cover the loans and show profit, but it was all smoke and mirrors, a Ponzi scheme. By the time it collapsed, Ethan owed $2, $5 million, and the people he owed weren't bankers. They were criminals, the kind of men who break bones when you can't pay. Monica is in with them, Ethan said, his eyes burning with shame. She's been working both sides, setting me up with debt and arranging my death so she could collect the land. That car crash, it never happened. The casket is filled with sandbags. The whole funeral was theater. I gripped his shoulders, trying to steady myself as the truth settled over me like ice water. My son was alive, but we were standing at the edge of something far more dangerous than grief. For 20 years, I had fought to protect him from life's blows. I wasn't about to let him be buried by criminals or betrayed by the woman he called his wife. "I won't lose you again," I told him firmly, my voice steadier than I felt. Not to Monica and not to anyone else. When I finally pulled into my driveway that night, the relief of seeing my little house waiting for me was short-lived. The lights were on inside, though I hadn't left them that way. My chest tightened. I stepped through the door and my world froze. 3 men were sitting in my living room as though they owned it. One of them lounged in my late husband's recliner, the very chair where he used to read the newspaper every evening. Another sat casually on my couch, flipping a pen between his fingers. The third stood near the window, watching me like a hawk. "Mrs. Parker," the man in the recliner said, his voice calm and cold. "We need to have a conversation." I didn't sit. My hands shook, but my voice was steady, the same voice I had used for 40 years to command unruly classrooms. "You've broken into my home. That's a crime." The man smirked. "What's a crime is your son owing us $2.5 million. He thought he could vanish, but debts don't disappear. So here are your options. Tomorrow night, you sign over that Colorado property. Or we take payment another way, starting with your son's life." The blood drained from my face. "And if I refuse, then both of you disappear for good," he said, leaning forward. Simple. Every instinct told me to collapse, to beg, but I knew weakness would only feed them. So I straightened my shoulders, channeling every ounce of teacher authority I still had. "I will not make decisions under threat. I'll review the documents and give you my answer tomorrow." The man studied me, then nodded slowly as though humoring an old woman. "Tomorrow night. No delays." They rose one by one, leaving my house as casually as they had entered, carrying the smell of smoke and menace with them. The moment the door shut, my legs gave out. I sat on the floor, shaking. But beneath the fear, a spark of determination flared. If they thought I was just a frightened widow, they were about to learn otherwise. The next morning, I drove into the city and walked into the office of Mark Rivera, my former student. 30 years earlier, I had scolded him for skipping essays and doodling in the margins of his Shakespeare homework. Now he was one of the most respected attorneys in the state. He rose from his leather chair with a grin. "Mrs. Parker, you look exactly the same, except maybe sterner." "I need your help, Mark," I said, my voice trembling. "It's a matter of life and death." Over coffee in his office, I poured out everything: the fake funeral, the stolen property, the threats in my living room. His smile faded into something hard and professional. "You realize this is fraud, conspiracy, extortion," he said, scribbling notes. "And if we handle it right, they'll hand us the evidence themselves." That's when we crafted the plan. Mark would draw up a set of documents that looked exactly like the property transfer the criminals demanded. But hidden in the dense legal language were clauses that forced the signers to acknowledge prior fraudulent activity and automatically triggered federal jurisdiction. In other words, the moment they signed, they were confessing to multiple felonies. That evening, I called Monica and told her I was ready. She suggested we meet privately, but I insisted on the Riverside Diner, the one place in town where half the local officials ate dinner, and the sheriff himself often sat with his meatloaf and reports. The next night, I walked into the diner carrying Mark's briefcase. Monica was already there, dressed in black with mascara artfully smudged, playing the part of the devastated widow. Beside her sat a man she introduced as David Ethan's business partner. His eyes were sharp, calculating. "Thank you for meeting us," Monica said, her voice trembling. "This has been so hard." I placed the documents on the table with deliberate calm. "Yes, dear. That's why I asked my lawyer to prepare these. Everything we need is right here." I will never forget the flicker in her eyes, the brief flash of irritation before she slipped back into her act. For the next 40 minutes, I sipped my coffee and let them comb through the papers, nodding at my careful explanations. When they finally signed their names, I hid my shaking hands under the table. They thought they had trapped me, but in reality, they had just sealed their own fate. The moment Monica and David pressed their pens to the last page, I excused myself with a polite smile. I carried the briefcase to Sheriff Tom Bradley, who happened to be finishing his meatloaf across the diner. Setting it on his table, I whispered, "They just signed confessions to fraud, conspiracy, and extortion. They're right over there." His fork froze in midair. Within seconds, his phone was in his hand, his voice low but firm. I slipped out into the night, my pulse racing. By the time I reached Industrial Boulevard later that evening, the trap was already set. The warehouse they had chosen as their meeting spot looked ordinary enough, sheet metal walls, a flickering security light, but the street around it had transformed. Black FBI SUVs lined the curbs. Tactical teams crouched in shadows, weapons ready but unseen, floodlights perched on tripods waiting for the signal. From my car on a nearby hill, I watched my heart hammering like a drum. At exactly 10:45, 3 cars rolled up to the warehouse. Monica and David led the way, Monica glowing with smug confidence as if she'd already claimed her prize. The second car held 2 of the men who had threatened me in my own living room. The third carried unfamiliar faces, likely the higher-ups who had orchestrated scams just like this across the country. They walked inside, casually, shoulders-loose laughter, echoing faintly into the night. To them, this was a celebration. They believed the millions were theirs. For 12 long minutes, the warehouse remained silent, its corrugated walls holding the sound of their false victory. Then, in an instant, the night erupted. Floodlights blazed on, drowning the building in stark white. A booming voice thundered from a megaphone. "This is the FBI. The building is surrounded. Exit with your hands in the air." Through my binoculars, I saw chaos, figures darting inside searching for an escape, but there was nowhere to go. One by one, they emerged, hands raised high. Monica's face was pale now, her mask of grief and grace shattered. David's scowled fury etched across his features. The others looked stunned, as though they couldn't comprehend how their perfect plan had unraveled. And then came the sweetest moment. Monica's wrists pulled behind her handcuffs, snapping shut. For months she had toyed with me, performed for me, plotted against me. Now she was nothing more than another criminal being loaded into the back of a police van. I sat in my car, breath-shaky tears spilling freely. Relief, pride, and sheer disbelief tangled inside me. The people who had threatened my son's life, who had underestimated me as a frightened widow, were now caught in their own net. Later that night, Sheriff Bradley called. His voice carried both authority and warmth. "It's over, Linda. We got them all. And with those documents, the FBI has linked them to fraud schemes targeting seniors across multiple states. Your son's name is clear. He's free." I pressed the phone to my ear and closed my eyes. For the first time in weeks, my heart unclenched. Ethan was safe. Justice had been served. And the world now knew what a retired schoolteacher was capable of when someone threatened her child. When the dust finally settled, Ethan came back home with me. We sat at the same kitchen table where I'd once helped him with math homework, drinking coffee like nothing had ever happened. But of course, everything had changed. He was no longer the trusting boy who believed love could fix everything. He had learned painfully that not everyone who says, "I love you," means it. And I, at 66, had discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. For weeks, we rebuilt our routines. He mowed the lawn, I baked pies, and slowly the shadows of fear gave way to laughter again. Ethan began to see that survival had given him wisdom, and I began to accept that my age did not make me fragile, it made me prepared. This story, as wild as it sounds, carries truths I want every woman over 45 to remember. Family does not mean someone has the right to exploit you. Setting boundaries is an act of self-respect, not selfishness. Age does not turn you into an easy target. You have every right to protect your assets and your life. And sometimes the very fact that people underestimate you becomes the source of your greatest power. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever faced betrayal, I invite you to share your experience in the comments. Don't forget to follow Real Her Stories like this video and share it so that more women will know they are not alone. We deserve love. We deserve respect. Always.